This morning I was very annoyed when I looked outside. I was like, why? Why? What is happening? And then I got a text from the southeast saying, it's snowing so hard here. And I'm like, yeah, is anyone else annoyed? It was just me. On Thursday, our kids had a program at their school, and the day it was like a little chilly, but it was nice. And then in the evening, just as I picked the kids up, one of the people who was coming to the school, he said, "Oh, I hope you have a good turnout tonight because it's supposed to snow." And then I looked at my weather thing and I said, "Oh, it just says it's supposed to rain a little." And then as I was driving away, 6 minutes later, it started snowing. And then I picked up Ezra, which is just in Strathcona, so not that far, and then it stopped snowing. And then by the time I got home, it was snowing again. And I told Sue, I said, "Oh, just so you know, it's snowing a lot out here." Because he was in the Northeast. He said, "Really?" And then when he got home, I said, "Oh, it's not snowing." And then I looked out the window and said, "It is snowing." So, yeah. People say, "Oh, it's just Calgary," but I don't think I remember it like this last year, the year before, or any of the other years I've been here. So for those of you who know me well, now you know one, I am not a fan of this weather. It's not that I totally mind snow, I just don't like this up and down. But you would also know that my husband and I are quite different. He is quiet, and I am less quiet. He can sit through a conversation and only speak when needed, and I feel a need to interject, interrupt, and to always have something to add while laughing as loud as possible. And he gets the value of rest while I see it as a problem to solve. CY will often tell me about the importance of listening to your body. All that woo-woo stuff, right? He talks about stopping when it's time to stop, making time to eat when it's time to eat, resting when it's time to rest, saying yes to sleep before getting 1, 2, or 3 more things done. And let me tell you, when we first got married, I just felt like all of that was a sign of laziness. To me, it felt like all that he was talking about was for people who just wanted to be mediocre. Until I found myself sitting in the doctor's office, telling her that I was exhausted, and she asked me really easy questions. What time do you go to bed at night? How many hours do you sleep? Do you make time for physical exercise? What do you do for rest? How do you recuperate? How much water do you drink? The famous question. And my answers were terrible. And she gave me a simple prescription, which was rest. And I was reminded about the gift of Sabbath. In the book of Genesis, the creation story includes what could be seen as a random statement that on the 7th day God rested. And then it goes on to say that God calls it holy and sacred, set apart, a holy declaration that the world is complete, that enough has been accomplished, completed, and made ready. This declaration of the 7th day of rest becomes what's known as the Sabbath, which would be the means through which the people would order their weeks and understand their festivals and organize their worship. Sabbath, a day set apart not as an unwelcome intrusion to the rhythm of busyness, but rather a well-curated and thoughtfully picked out gift from God to the people. A day that was less about what humans could and should and must do, but more so a lifelong revelation and reminder about who God is, our provider. The one who declares that there's more than enough for everyone. But somewhere along the way, Sabbath moves from being seen as a gift to one thing that feels like a hindrance to productivity. Such is the story of the Exodus. The opening chapters of the text offer us a picture of what happens when we lose sight of rest and find ourselves enmeshed in systems based solely on what we must do, ought to do, should do, and can do for the sake of whichever voice or power, person or system has convinced us that rest is counterproductive and wasteful and only for those who deserve it. In the Exodus, that person is the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh insisted that there was this never-ending demand that the Israelites had to keep up with. Rest was the reward for those who ruled, and work was the punishment of those who were enslaved. And for centuries, the people's mindset had been shifted and shaped and changed by this idea that rest was not for them, that exhaustion was their portion, and enough was a dream that they dare not consider because they believed that they were not born to be free. And so when they are made free and find themselves in the desert on the long road to the promised land, we ought not be surprised that they do not believe that God is enough. Nor do they understand the gift of rest that was always intended to be their own. And so as they find themselves at the entrance of the Red Sea, they are certain that God is not enough for them. When they are thirsty and only see rocks around them, they are certain that God is not enough for them. And when they are tired of the dry bread they have brought along and begin to recall all of the foods that they left behind, all that seems worthy of returning to bondage, they go so far as to ask to go back to Pharaoh, to go back to Egypt, for they fear that God is not enough for them. This mindset persists despite the reality that each step of the way, God has been holding the gift of rest, the gift of trust, the gift of Sabbath, as he opened the Red Sea, as water flows from a rock, as manna falls from heaven, and quails are provided for the evening meal. Each step of the way, God affirms that he can indeed be trusted and that they were created and designed to be a people shaped by a God who is their provider, rather than to be shaped by the mindset of the slave driver. Pharaoh, which insisted that they were designed for scarcity, there is God with each step in the desert reminding them that their God is more than enough. But in order for them to truly understand that they have been liberated, it is important for them to recognize and reclaim that for 6 days you will work, and on the 7th day you will rest. And so when manna falls from heaven, they're reminded that there will always be enough. They don't need to hoard, to save, or put away, except on the 6th day. 1 day a week, they were to pause, to rest, and to take from that which they have labored for without needing to labor more. And so each time there is enough, they are reminded that they are no longer a part of Pharaoh's world. They are no longer a part of Pharaoh's rules. They have been delivered from that which sought to enslave them and made free to live as ones who know that God, their provider, gives good gifts, even the gift of unmerited and undeserved and unearned rest. Rest is liberation. But this gift wrapped in liberation slowly begins to morph into regulation and religiosity. What was once freely offered as a gift becomes more and more like a burden, something they need to worry that they just might get wrong. They might not rest enough. They might cook too much or move too much. They might walk too far, help someone at the wrong time, pick something up or take something down at the wrong moment. They could cook their food too early or too late or too long, and the gift of rest suddenly becomes this burden of rules. The Sabbath moves from being a sign that God provides and becomes a test of whether you were good enough. From a sign of liberation to great pressure, from a God who frees to a God who burdens. That is where we encounter Jesus in Mark chapter 2. As he and the disciples are walking through the grain fields. The man-made rules of the Sabbath have become so stringent that even for them to pick that tiny piece of grain was considered a violation of the rules, was considered harvesting. And the disciples have carelessly plucked some grain and put it in their mouth. And the religious wonder, how could this new religious leader allow his followers to break the rules without even a single care or word of correction and admonition? And so they call out to Jesus and they call out to his disciples as they announce, "Why are you breaking the law by harvesting on the Sabbath?" And Jesus' response is, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people and not people to meet the needs of the Sabbath. And just like that, Jesus wonders aloud, why do you hold on to systems that prioritize rules over people? Why do you hold on to systems that are prioritized over lived experiences, doctrine prioritized over the lives they affect? Why do you take that which God has offered freely and make it so costly to attain? In other words, when your religiosity cares more about persistent and perfect conformity rather than those for whom you are asking to conform, you are no longer in line with who God has always been. You are now simply in line with your religion. How easy it is for us to ask people to conform. How easy it is for us to ask people to follow, to obey each and every rule according to the letter of the law as it is written by us, and to completely ignore the humanity in the process. How easy it is for us to imagine that God does not care about the needs and the experience and the situations of the people that they created, that they sustained, that they breathe life into. But when we recall that God is like Jesus, we are reminded that conformity to rules and doctrines, policies and systems, leaders and persons that allow for harm to our neighbors, the omission of love as our ethos, and the allowance of a religiosity that suggests kindness is optional and hate is practical, that religion, that statement, that system, that policy is no longer about following the way of Jesus, but has become nothing more than the religion that falsely or loosely carries the name of Jesus. And those two things are not the same. Religious practice that excludes humans from the equation can never produce freedom, which means it can never be informed by who God is or what God is like. And so as Jesus announces that the people were made not to meet the requirements of the Sabbath, he is announcing to the religious leaders, when your rules allow for harm to your neighbor, perhaps it's time to change the rules. when your perspective leaves you condoning that which God has already declared moves in opposition to who he is, perhaps you should consider changing your perspective when your doctrines and policies and statements support actions, words, or steps that leave us unable to love God and our neighbor, or point us to be more susceptible to hate. Maybe it's time for change. For the Sabbath was made for the people, not the people for the Sabbath. I want you to consider when your child is ill. That happens a lot. It's getting less now that we're getting older, but there was a time when almost any time one would go to school and get sick and come home and then use their brother's toothbrush. Then the other would get sick, and the other one would get better, and then this one is sick, and then my middle one, who is the least likely to get sick, would wait an extra 2 weeks, and just when I think I can go back to work with ease, then he follows suit. When our children are sick, the rules suddenly shift. Suddenly, popsicles at 7 a.m. Are a means to maintain hydration and soothe a sore throat. The rules around going to school are loosened as we make space in the school day to take them to the doctor. Our no sugar rule may be excused if a child is facing dehydration and a loss of electrolytes or is unable to gain strength through eating. When the situation shifts, we must adjust and respond with what it means to follow the way of Jesus within our new context, rather than to simply follow the way of conformity to religion. Now, if you are like me, that's the part of the sermon that you're going to like. That's the part that you want to lean into. That's the part that makes you happy. And then I'm reminded that Jesus did not just simply suggest that Sabbath was this optional accessory that we could choose when to take on when it's convenient. Instead, he says, Sabbath was made for the people. And so, yes, the religiosity, which can be stifling, ought to be weeded out. But the invitation, the gift of Sabbath, should still be something that we choose to accept. There's a story that I've told probably too many times, so close your ears if you've heard it before. But at Christmas time, up until maybe recently, and actually I haven't gone home for Christmas in a long time, home meaning my parents' home, and my mom would always make Christmas a really big deal. So she'd be out in the snow hanging things up on the trees. She was going to every party. She was hosting parties. And she would buy all of these dish sets because, of course, we're not just going to grab paper plates. No, not in Marlene Slack's home. The table must be set, and it must be set nicely, and we are going to gather. One of the things that she would do is she would get these boxes, and she would put them on the tables, and that box would be like the last gift of the day. And it was always something that she kind of got that was special, or something she thought the other person would enjoy. And my nephew, who was probably 3 or 4, one year, as he opened his box, he opened it and there was a $50 bill. And he was devastated. He said, "Why did Grandma only give me a piece of paper?" There's something about not understanding the value of what is offered, the worth of the gift that is given, that allows us to leave something of value on the table and to call it worthless. So many of us have left the gift of Sabbath, the invitation to rest, the space for renewal and restoration, for connection and rejuvenation behind because we weren't quite sure that it held any value, at least not as much value as getting things done. And in a world marked by a Pharaoh mindset that insists there is never enough, exhaustion is the cost for excellence. And profit over people is always the way forward. Do more, work harder, prove your worth, and earn your rest. And so while we can shout and get excited about letting go of the rules of religion, we so often struggle to accept the gift that comes from the God who declared that rest was holy, that Sabbath was sacred, that our ability to intentionally pause was what set us apart and marked us as belonging to the God who has the capacity to carry you through the wilderness, to bring water from rocks and food from heaven. Yet this sacred gift is one we often want to leave unopened or leave behind. We are in the midst of a series where we're talking about what it looks like to put our faith into action. Last week, we started with the word abide, that we would be a people who stay connected with Christ so that we can become who we were created to be in the fullness of what it is that God intends for us. And this week, we're talking about the practice of rest, intentional Sabbath. We live in a world where what we produce and what we earn and what we can prove we deserve are considered that which we ought to strive towards. Pharaoh's world, where exhaustion is our reward. And it is to the lie of that world that insists we do more because we do not deserve rest that the value of Sabbath speaks the loudest. Sabbath declares you are more than what you produce. You are worthy of rest. You are more than what you earn. Exhaustion is not your portion. You do not have to prove your worth. From the very beginning, you were more than enough. And the beauty of this gift of rest and of pause and of Sabbath is that even when we don't believe its message to be true, the very act of intentional rest, of intentional pause, of intentional Sabbath reminds us that even if we don't feel like we are enough or feel like we have done enough or accomplished enough, the one who created us, who breathes life into us and rejoices over us, insists that they are more than enough for us, regardless of if we live in that liberated truth or not. They declare that we are enough for God. The whisper of Sabbath is that there is another way to live. The voice of Pharaoh is not the only voice that we can listen to. The way of production is not the only way that we can take. The idea that we must earn in order to deserve rest is not all that there is. Sabbath announces that in a world of scarcity, it invites you to lean into the rhythm of abundance, which says there is enough. Enough time to rest, enough space to pause, enough opportunity to stop, enough promise and future to let some things pass you by. In a world of scarcity, Sabbath announces abundance. Brueggemann says this. He says, Sabbath is not simply the pause that refreshes, it is the pause that transforms. It declares our life are not defined by what we produce or what we consume. The practice of Sabbath is an act of resistance against the demands of a culture that insists we be endlessly productive. It is a visible, public refusal to submit to the anxiety system of our world. Sabbath, the pause that transforms. Are you ready to be transformed by rest? Are you ready to be transformed by the power of pausing? Are you ready to be transformed by the practice of Sabbath? Growing up, I remember when they allowed shopping on Sunday. I'm that old. Who told us this morning that they're so old? Kristen, Sarah? Yeah, 29 or something. Right. So I remember, and I was quite young, so I'll just put that caveat in. But but I do remember the conversations that went on around it. And people were afraid of something that they were going to lose, but they were never really afraid of losing the gift of Sabbath. They were instead afraid of losing position and power within the culture. Growing up, Sabbath meant one thing, and that was that you were going to go to church on Sunday morning. You were going to rest Sunday afternoon after my mom would cook a humongous meal for like 6 guests, and then wash the dishes, and then make supper for us and get ready to go again. So restful. Sabbath meant missing out on the end of the wonderful world of Disney. Every single week, we would get to watch like the first 20 minutes and then be called to go upstairs and get ready. We never knew how things ended. Sabbath meant being extra quiet. Sabbath meant being in a rush to run back to the church. But what if Sabbath was not just about making space for congregational worship? Of course, this is what I do. I do think there is space and beauty and meaning for gathering together. I think gathering in community to pray together, to encourage one another, and to learn together is a part of Sabbath. But Sabbath was made for the people. The people were not made for Sabbath. So what can rest and pause look like that leads to transformation besides taking on the regular and intentional act of gathering? Well, I'm very certain that Sabbath that is transformative would not point us towards more exhaustion, towards more rules or more bondage, but liberation that is multiplied, love that grows, and connection with God and our neighbors that expands. And so Sabbath should nourish us rather than numb us. It should not leave us feeling guilty or trying to avoid guilt. It's not an opportunity to be more performative or to be seen as a means for a reward because we burnt ourselves out and found ourselves exhausted. Sabbath isn't about striving or proving ourselves or feeling pressure. Instead, it's about stopping, putting pause on meeting expectations and needing to be producing or seeking to perform. Sabbath looks like rest, engaging in actions that leave you restored in body and mind and spirit, not just more numb or absent from life. Sabbath looks like seeking out delight, making space for beauty and joy and laughter for people who energize you, experiences that leave you reminded of how deeply you are loved and what you love deeply. And Sabbath looks like putting trust into action. Sabbath is the act of putting trust into action that allows you to live as though this is true. God is at work even when you are not. Rest that transforms requires courage. It requires courage to say no to things and to courageously say yes to others. It takes courage to turn off your notifications, or as I made CY last night, I said, just take my phone. Or to turn off our phones altogether. It takes courage to read for enjoyment without any kind of outcome. That is so hard for me to do. Everything has to be for a purpose. It takes courage to consider Scripture as a means of listening and not just a means of studying or achieving some kind of check mark for the day. It takes courage to see quiet as an act of restoration. Courage to make space for silence, courage to make space for prayer, courage to try something new, to go somewhere unexpected, to seek out beauty, courage to reorder your week so that you have time to rest, courage to care for your body in ways that rest doesn't lead to this immune system crash, but leaves you ready for the remainder of the week. Courage to gather, courage to stay on your own, courage to be intentional and disciplined about the work of pausing, courage to find creative ways to engage with God, and courage to create rhythms of worship. Courage to stop, to rest, to delight, to trust. Sabbath was made for us, a gift from God for all of creation. It is our courageous declaration that God and not our work, not our production, our anxiety, or our accomplishments are at the center of life. Sabbath is our refusal to allow a Pharaoh-like world to consume us. It is resistant to the idea that we are not enough. An acceptance of the truth that we are already considered more than enough in the eyes of a God who insists they have enough for you. Sabbath is living as though we believe that we are made to be free. Sabbath is the practice of making space to love God, to love self, and to love others. Sabbath was made for the people. Will we allow ourselves to be transformed by this gift? Will we allow ourselves to accept it, to open it, and to receive it? I'll ask the worship team to come forward. And I want us to, some sermons are for you, and this one was absolutely for me. This week I told the team, I said, oh, we're talking about Sabbath, it's so annoying. So this is like the worst sermon topic ever. And I meant it. I still kind of do. But I said, I just feel like, people who rest a lot just don't like getting things done. And then as I went through the passages and went through scripture, I was really reminded that this is not something that is kind of forced on us. It's not something that takes away from us, but it's something that offers us this gift to be restored and made ready for what is to come. I'm going to ask you to stand, and we're going to pause for a moment, and I want you to think about what it looks like for you to be invited into rest this week. What it looks like for you to create rhythms of pause, rhythms of worship, rhythms of gathering, rhythms of taking time to stop, to rest, to delight. I want you to think about what it looks like for you to pause, to trust. And as you think and ponder, I'm going to pray for you. God, we ask that in this moment, that this thing that is so hard for us to take hold of, that speaks counter to a world that asks us to do and do and do more, God, we ask that you would give us courage and wisdom to live this out. That we would allow ourselves to be rejuvenated by you, that we would allow ourselves to find rest in you, not as a moment in time, but as a way of being. That we would be allowed to have a renewed lifestyle, one that is transformed by your Spirit at work in us, that allows us to stop and pause and listen for what's next. That we would have opportunity to rest in the presence of one another, to rest in the presence of you, to rest and do those things that build us up, not those things that leave us drained. God, I ask that you would invite us into new opportunities to experience and engage in delight. That we would have opportunity to celebrate together, to bring joy together, to worship together, to engage together, and to find ourselves filled with opportunities to seek out beauty and to seek out opportunity that we might not otherwise, because we took the time to rest. And in all things, May we be courageous enough to trust you. To trust that you are at work when we are still, that you are at work despite all that asks us to keep going, that you are at work, and that means that we can trust in you, rest in you, rely on you, and expect from you that you will be more than enough for us. Amen.